False? Yeah? Exist? You sure? Not sure? Maybe, maybe. Sorry, this is read down at the bottom. How do you know you exist? How do you know?
You feel.
You feel? That's good. Yeah?
Emotions.
You feel emotions. That's one thing you feel. Yeah? More things?
Conscious.
Huh?
Conscious.
Well, what do you mean by you're conscious? Give us a
You're
little more.
aware of, like, it's right, you're aware of thinking, you're aware of, like, different things which are going on.
Yeah. You're aware of stuff. Anything else? That's the big ones, aren't they?
Sensory.
Sensory, you're aware of sensory stuff that's coming in through your senses. And we'll explore those in a little bit more detail. And those are good. And actually, what you have offered is a real kind of proper analysis of consciousness. Now, often in many of the texts and in many of the courses and many of the lectures I attend, people will not offer consciousness like that. They will try and explain it to be some kind of higher thinking or some kind of processing or some kind of behaviorism. And all of those things are real, but they're missing the point of what we all know to be about consciousness, is that I am the person feeling stuff. I know I exist. Right? Now we might argue with what that all means, but I know I exist. I feel it. I wake up every morning and go, oh, I'm here. You know? I'm back. And I am the subject of my experiences. Because each one of you are saying, I feel stuff. I see stuff. I experience stuff. The I is the subject. So you are the subject of what you experience. It's stuff that happens to you, isn't it? Therefore you know I exist. And when I exist, I'm experiencing stuff. And what you experience is this word qualia. You experience qualia. Hands up who has heard of this word qualia before. Ooh! Astounded! What do you study?
I used to study philosophy, so we covered qualia instead.
Amazing that you even covered at that level, because in even many university courses it's not touched unless you actually study consciousness itself. Qualia, the most important word in the world, I think. So, repeat after me. Qualia.
Qualia.
All right, very good. Qualia. It's a Latin word, and it's plural. The singular is quale, but you never come across it on its own. It's always qualia. It did get an outing on the television series Humans, at least the first, I think it was the first series. You know the evil company that was making all the robots, what was it called? Qualia Industries. Ah. So the big question is, what are qualia? And they're usually described using the proverbial red ball. Now, what qualia are, it's explored in this way. It's what is it like to experience this red ball? Let's look at it visually. What is it like to experience its redness?
It's vibrant.
Huh?
It's vibrant.
Yeah, but you see, qualia is not the emotions that are set up from it. Qualia is the actual experience of redness itself. It's a common misconception that people think that how does it make you feel? And you know, red, you could say, is a warm colour. It makes me feel cosy, and you know, whereas if it was blue, you know. So there's an experience of redness, and it's different to blueness. But it isn't how that blueness makes you feel, where you can say that's a cold colour and that's a warm colour. What we're really talking about is the actual experience of the colour itself. It is different for you to experience redness than it is to experience blueness. Just in pure colour terms, isn't it? So that's what qualia are about. It's what you actually experience about the redness or the blueness. And most times when qualia are discussed, I'm sure they were discussed in terms of sensory experiences. The main mistake that is made about qualia are thinking that you're experiencing something out there, something outside of your senses. But really what qualia are about are how you experience the stuff out there in here. That's the real trick about qualia. It's not what the characteristics of the objects are, it's how you experience them. Now, there's other types of qualia besides the sensory ones, which I'm going to analyze in a little more detail. There's the internal ones. You mentioned emotions. And so things like fear, happiness, even hunger, that's an internal sensation. There's a certain thing that it's like to feel hungry, isn't it? Or to feel thirsty. And then there's, this one is more controversial for some of the philosophers, and that is that qualia also includes things like thoughts, ideas, memories, things that come into your mind. There's something that is like to experience them. Never mind the content of them, there's something like just to hear a thought inside your mind. There's something that it is like to experience that. So, mental content. Now, qualia are ineffable. They're the stuff that you experience. And if I was to ask you, tell me, I have never experienced red. Tell me what it is like. Can you describe what it is like to experience red? Right? Can you explain that to me? Without pointing at something and trying to say, well, it's like that colour or something like that. Is there any way you can tell me what it is like to experience redness?
Passion.
Yeah, but that's using a different word. And passion might mean something completely. It doesn't tell me what redness is like. You see, we tend to describe the qualia we experience in cooked terms. This is a kind of philosophical term. Cooked terms, we are describing how it makes us feel. Like we might say, oh, that food is really hot, meaning it's chilly hot, right? As a way of describing its taste, right? Or I might say, just like we use the example, that makes me feel warm. Redness makes me feel warm. It's a warm colour. But that's not telling me anything at all about the experience of redness. It's telling me what it makes you feel, but it's not telling me about redness. So saying this is warm is a cooked expression, not the real qualia itself. And to give you an idea of how difficult it is to understand how other people might experience qualia, we use this example, which you all probably know and remember. That dress. All right, I've got to ask, hands up, the blue and black. Okay? Hands up, the gold and white. Yes, you're correct. Because you agree with me. Some of us see this as gold and white, absolutely. And I know some of you see it as black and blue, absolutely. Yeah? Did you come across this before?
No.
This is called a bistable percept. It is something which sets off different qualia experiences inside in different people. We are now two groups of people, as divided as Brexit. And some of us swear blind that we are seeing white and gold as the colour of that dress. And others are saying, no, it's absolutely black and blue. You're experiencing a different colour to me. That's weird, isn't it? We're both getting exactly the same light coming from into our eyes, but we're experiencing different internal impressions of what that colour is. So this is interesting. This is starting to question whether the stuff out there and how we experience internally are the same thing. We're going to look at that a little bit. Just to clarify, I don't know if this photograph actually helps much, but it is black and blue, the original. It was taken in a certain light that confused, that you could either think, oh, I think that's in soft light, and therefore my mind is going to read it gold and white. Or you can think, well, it's actually just dull light and it should have been black and blue, darker colors. Your mind is making a judgment on it. We've got the same electrical data in our brains, but your mind can go one way or the other. Now, with a lot of bistable percepts, you can go one way or other yourself. You can see it in this way or that way. Remember the Yanni Laurel thing? Any of you do that, yeah? Did any of you hear it in different ways? It was a little phrase that was on the internet. It came out of a dictionary saying laurel. But actually the way it came out, it sounded Yanni. Laurel, land, yeah, you know. And you could get confused about it. But with this one, we can't switch. Once you see it in one, you're not going to see it in the other. But anyway, there's lots of aspects of this where our mind is doing the judgment for us. It's making up its mind what it wants to show you. And it's not always based on the physical information that is out there or the data that the brain has got. Here's one example. This is called Adelson's checkerboard. I don't know if it's very clear, but there's A and B. Can you see those? Come on, Ryan, there's lots of nice seats here. Yeah? Come on, Ryan, yeah, grand. So I do want you to see the board as much as possible. So we've got various chairs. So A and B, are they the same color or are they different? Well, of course, actually the lighting's a little harsh in this end, but that's so it may be affecting it. But yep, they are identical colours of grey. But when you see it, even though I've told you and proved to you that they're the same, your mind still has a problem adjusting to it. You've got to understand that the light bouncing off there and the light bouncing off there is absolutely identical going into your eye and setting off your rods. Is it grey? Setting off the rods. And your brain's got identical information about both, but that's not how you experience it. Something else is taking over and convincing you that they're different. Here's a few others. You can see all these lines are absolutely parallel to one another, aren't they? Oh yes, sorry. Actually, sorry. I usually have one with the lines drawn on it, just to show you. Absolutely parallel, those lines. But your brain, you do not experience it in that way. So your qualia experience is different to what's out there. Another one. Your mind is now saying, oh, this is spinning a little bit. This is turning inside out. I'm starting to get seasick on this one. There's another one. So your mind is saying, oh, something's moving here, but nothing's moving. Now you can explain why these things are happening, but the interesting thing is that there seems to be a mechanism that has taken the data in your brain, which is received by your senses, and actually producing an experience for you that is a little different. So qualia are considered to be inexplicable, irreducible. You cannot explain them in terms of just what the brain is doing and what we know of physics. And I'm going to give you a little example first using sound. This is a little kalimba. A thumb. Oh, I should play here. Now, think about what sound is. You know, you have that conundrum, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Hands up who thinks it makes a sound. Hands up who thinks that the sound hasn't actually happened yet. I'm going to show you the sound hasn't happened yet. See, because this is one of the problems with English language. Sound has two meanings. In terms of physics, we call sound the pressure wave that is set up once I do that. There's a vibration. Therefore that vibrates, and it also vibrates the bass a little bit, and that sets up a pressure wave, longitudinal wave in air. Is that sound? Or is that a pressure wave?
Pressure.
It's a pressure wave, that's all it is. Now, that moves the air. There's information. Information is taken from that vibration and it's now carried and transmitted through the air. It hits the eardrum, alright? It's a flap of skin just moving back and forwards with this pressure wave on it. Is that movement back and forwards sound? You can hardly call that sound, it's just movement of skin. That sets up the movement then of the ossicles, 3 little bones, you know, that join your eardrum with the cochlea. So it's those 3 little bones there. So they start moving back and forwards like this. Is that sound? Where's the sound gone? Or has it not happened yet? So then that pressurizes what's called the oval window on the cochlea, this kind of snail-shaped thing here, and it puts pressure on the fluid inside. And because the way it's like hydraulics, you can't pressure liquid, it just has to go somewhere. And where it goes is that all the way along there, there's that tube is divided sort of in half with this kind of wavy membrane all the way up the middle. So when there's pressure on the end of it, it sets up a vibration all the way along that membrane. And is that sound? No. We've got, that's just a bit of fluid moving in another flap of skin. But when that flap moves, it might set off some little hairs. And if the hairs move, little cilia. And if those cilia move, they're connected to nerves, which then fire an electrical signal. So is that sound? No, that's still just a bit of movement and a bit of... Now it's electrical data. And it's digital. Firing, not firing. And that sends the electrical data into the brain. And then we've got all this data in the brain. Basically patterns of electricity firing off, and basically this information goes over to here, this part of the brain, this one goes on to this part of the brain. And it just little firing. So we've now got electrical activity in the brain. Where's the sound?
Not happened yet.
Well, then where is it? But you heard a sound. You experienced a sound. Where is that sound?
Your perception.
Huh?
The perception.
But where's that? And what is that?
Is it carried through the vibrations of the information? Carried through the vibrations?
No, but we now know that whatever information was there, whatever that information is now this electrical pattern. Where's the sound?
But yeah, it's in the it's in that message, so it's in the
Alright,
vibration.
so it's a message, but it's electricity.
Yeah,
All
so
your brain has got is electricity, but what you experience about that electricity
Sound.
that's what I mean. The
It's
information in that vibration, information is the same as in the information, yeah.
it's in the information
Yeah.
is there.
So it's not out there. It's
But,
in the,
but what we're asking about is what the experience of that information is. That's the tricky bit. Now I appreciate this is a little difficult to get your head around if you haven't explored it yet. But we've got the data. One example is like this. Here, this is in visual terms, but I'll come back to the sound in a second. One sense you could say these are identical. This is got the lines and it's got the colours represented as 1 or 2. Colour by numbers, right? So all the data for the picture is contained there. All the information is there. But you don't experience it in that data form, you experience it in qualia form. That's the mystery. Just like music. I found this the other day in amongst my old stuff. All you need is love. Now, at least vinyl's making a comeback, right? But mostly in 12-inch, right? It's amazing that still 50 years and so on, you can actually play this. That won't be true of MP3s. In 50 years' time, you will not be able to play your MP3. Anyway. This is All You Need Is Love. Everyone heard the song? If you had to sing it to yourself, you'd be able to, right? So everything you need to know about the song is contained in that groove. That single groove going round, which it's all contained in that, all the data is on that groove. Is that the song? No. It's the data representing the song. But it's not the song as you experience it. And this is the weird stuff about qualia. The real hard problem. That we know how the data is stored in the brain. We know how it gets there through our senses. We know how it is transmitted. You know, whether it's sound, whether it's visual, we know how it gets into the brain. We can even track it by scanning it. Down to the last neuron we can track it. But when we track it, all we find is digital electrical data. And we wonder, where's the song? Where's the sound? Where's the image? The brain has got data, but that's not how we experience it. We don't experience it as data, we experience it as qualia. That becomes what is known as the hard problem. And we're going to look at colours now. And I'm going to suggest to you that colours are not experienced from stuff out there, colours are experienced inside the mind. Would you like to do a little experiment to try that? You may have done this many times yourself. You know, I'd like you to cover your eyes like this so that you're blocking out all light. Don't do this if there's a little sensitivity in your eyes or there's any issue on this. First of all, do it so that you're just looking in blackness. And then start looking out as if you were looking at the stars in the sky. You know, because you see these little specks. So look out at them as if you're looking, and then start looking around. So you're getting used to the scenario. Just, you need to keep both eyes completely covered, all right? You're getting used to it now? Nod if you're kind of there with that. All right, good. Now, I want to do something which is more sensitive. I want you to put a bit of pressure on your eyes. And you can maybe do that by scrunching up and putting a little pressure maybe with your fingertips. Just hold it, sustain it, until you start to see colours appear. First, usually blues, greens. Pressure, you know, a little bit more, it starts to be reds and yellows. And maybe this big flashes of whites coming in now, yeah? Alright, that's probably good enough for pressing on your eyeballs. You're off to his hospital now. Now, interesting. You were experiencing colour, didn't you? Didn't you see colours? But you've been told colour comes from light. You've been told light is a colour. And you have been experiencing colour without light. Isn't it? Because all that's out there, let me show you another one of this. This is the stuff that you've been fed in school. That light is coloured. Now here's the visible spectrum. There's red light, there's green light, there's blue light. Right? Now, it's true that the wavelengths set off the experience of redness in your mind, or the experience of blueness, or the experience of greenness. But the light itself isn't coloured. It's simply a wavelength. Now, Isaac Newton, who was one of the big guys who investigated spectrum way back, right? He came up with an interesting question. He was looking at the spectrum and said, oh, that's interesting, a handful of different colours there. But where's magenta? Where's magenta? What wavelength is magenta? If light is a specific wavelength, what wavelength is magenta? And the answer is it's not. There is no wavelength associated with it. But I'll see if I can do this on here. I just need a little white bit. Schrödinger also, you know, the guy with the dodgy cat, also experimented on this. Let's see, is that? Yeah. So that's going to be too bright. Can you see if I do this over here? Sorry. Now, what it is, if there's red and there's blue. Oh, let me just stop that flashing. You see, when you put them overlapping, what do you see? You see magenta. Yeah? So you think, oh yeah. So you can mix colours. You cannot mix wavelengths. If you know anything about physics, you know you cannot mix wavelengths. You don't mix two wavelengths and get a third unique wavelength. And if that's what you were taught in school, you should sue your teachers. What is actually happening, and you really have to appreciate this, is that the red wavelength goes into your eye and may get picked up by one of your cones. And you've got three types of cones, most of us in humans. And one of them is set off by wavelengths in this area. Another is set off by wavelengths in this area. Another is set off by wavelengths in that area. And we call them the red, green and blue areas. Fair enough. But it's not that the light is coloured, it's that we have those three types of sensitivity in our eyes. So the wave of the red comes in, it hits a cone, particular cone, fires. Beep, 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 beep. Message goes into the brain, right to the end of the back. Right? Another wavelength comes in, on the blue side, say, and hits a different cone. And this one, this is this is the wavelength I respond to. So click, fire, beep, 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 beep. Now your brain has got two bleeps coming into it. Right? And instead of saying, oh, I got one at red and got one at blue, what does it do? Somehow or other, what you experience of what the brain's got is a new colour which doesn't exist in the spectrum, but exists in your experience of it. That's magenta. You experience about 1 million different colours. There isn't that number in the spectrum. It's not that they're out there. It's the interpretation that your mind gives to the variance of the firing that it gets from these three different cones. Now there are some people who are tetrachromats, who have 4 types of cones, and they're said to experience about 100 times the number of colours that we do. That means they're experiencing colours we've never even heard of or could not even imagine. But all from these 4 different stimulus. So
say someone has synesthesia, would they have more qualia?
synesthesia, yeah?
Would they have more qualia than, say, someone like myself?
No, synesthesia is an interesting one. Just to, maybe not everyone's familiar with the term. Synesthesia generally is when there's mixing of the experiences. When you can hear a colour. You know, if suddenly this appears in front of you and you get bong. You know, or bang, and you see a flash. You know, you experience it. What that usually means is that something is happening. The sensors are picking up the data, the physical data as normal, sending it to your brain, but somehow or other the way the mind is reading the brain, it's getting mixed up. And where it thought that was an input should be related to a sound, it's giving you a visual thing. So synesthesia is a very good example of how qualia are created in the mind rather than what the brain's got. Now, you might think, well, yeah, it's okay, here we are in the Atma Paradigm, the Hare Krishnas are always talking about weird and wonderful stuff, But what's the science? What do the scientists believe in all of this? Well, what I've explained to you is actually taken from, based on this image here, which was from a paper called A Framework for Consciousness, written by Francis Crick and Christoph Koch. Francis Crick is the DNA guy. After DNA, he wanted to deal with consciousness, and he wanted to completely establish that consciousness was produced from the brain. So he developed his own theories on that. But even then, he recognized, and he published this picture in his paper. And what it shows you is the outside world here. Light bouncing off it, going into the eye. And as we've described, it's just like a video camera. Think of it like a video camera. Light is focused through the lens onto a plate. In the eye, of course, it's the retina. But The plates in the video camera and in the eye do exactly the same thing. They turn light energy into electricity. And that electricity again, beep, 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 all the way back into the brain. It hits these things. There's the, picking up there, feeding into the nerve. And you can represent all that neural activity as digital data. And that's the point we were making earlier, that the brain has digital data, but somehow or other, you don't experience it as data, as electricity, as patterns in the brain. You experience it as an image. And this is the big question. And he recognized also that there are the easy bits. As we said, analyzing the physical characteristics of the outside world, seeing how our senses pick that up, seeing where it goes in the brain, seeing how that might set up responses in us, seeing how that sets off neurotransmitters and all that stuff. You know, it's highly complex stuff. These guys are super brains working with some incredible machinery, and they're doing some amazing stuff. But as far as the issue of consciousness goes, that's the easy bit. The hard bit is trying to explain why it is that we experience qualia. How do we get from these electrical patterns to the image that you experience in your mind? And the question is, and why is it that it feels like it is me experiencing that? That's what I'm experiencing, not that. I am the thing that experiences this. I am not the thing that experiences that. That's the computer bit. That's the processing bit. That's the data bit. But I am the observer of this output. So the hard problem was really defined by David Chalmers. I was with Stuart Hameroff last year. He did a program with us in Oxford. And he runs the Consciousness and Science Conference in Tucson biannually. And it's the biggest conference in the world on consciousness stuff. And he remembers way back, I think it was 94, when he started it, he had a couple of philosophers come along. They gave really boring talks about this, that and the other, and everyone was falling asleep. And then up to the stage comes David Chalmers, this Australian guy with his long hair and flamboyant kind of things. But he turned the whole conference around because he threw out the challenge to philosophers and said, all this other stuff you're talking about, this neuroscience, that's great, all the neurology, fine, all the philosophy, fine, but if you want to deal with consciousness, you have to deal with the hard problem. How the physical processes in the brain give rise to the subjective experience of qualia. That was the challenge he threw out then, which still stands today, and which really has turned the study of consciousness on its head. At least it has made it impossible to try and dive or duck away from that question. So, the hard problem. No one has produced any plausible explanation as to how the experience of the redness of red could arise from the actions of the brain. Now, who said that? Francis Crick. Do you know where he said it? In his paper, A Framework for Consciousness. So although he is offering his theory of what consciousness is, he's acknowledging, my theory does not deal with qualia. And that is true of all the other theories of consciousness. It is not the issue isn't that we don't have any theories of consciousness. The problem is we've got too many theories of consciousness. It's like asking the detective, so the murder victim here, have you got any theories of who the murderer is? I've got hundreds of theories. So you mean you haven't got anything? You really haven't got anything then, have you? No. So, the difficulty for the brain idea that consciousness could be explained by the brain is problematic. Now, I've just shown that the brain model cannot handle qualia, but actually it cannot even handle perception. Even the sort of things we've been talking about, even the easy bits are more complicated than you believe. I'm going to give you just two examples this afternoon, this evening. All right? The first one is called sparseness. This is a known neuroscience problem. That the brain has actually got very little data to work with. We think that all the data picked up by our senses is going into our brain. Nope. Here's how it works. We're going to do calculations on bits of that data. A bit is a bit, and a byte is 8 bits. So it gives you an idea of how much data we're talking about here. So, hitting the retina, 100 billion bits of information flood into your eye at any one moment and are hitting the retina. Wow, that's a lot of data. Amazing. However, not all of that is picked up by the rods and cones. Some of it just misses. So, and not all the data picked up by the cones and rods activates them. Not all of it gets collected. So by the time the data from all those rods and cones that make up your retina gather that 100 billion bits of data and gather it at the top of the optic nerve ready to send to the brain, you're down to 6 million bits. That's a huge loss of data. Right? You get fired for that. So heading down the optic nerve, 6 million bits. But it's a slow trundle down. It goes at 268 miles an hour actually. And it arrives at the visual processing area. Oh, it's now down to 10,000 bits. So out of the 100 billion bits of data, this is just relating to one image at this moment, bing. Only 10,000 reaches the brain. And even then, they reckon that out of that data, probably associated with any one visual picture that you have in your mind, it's about 500. That's sparseness. That's really sparse. 500 bits is equivalent to something like 2 pixels. If your new iPhone 27 comes out and it's now got 2 pixel camera. Oh! Not very impressive. But that's what your brain has got to play with. 2 pixels worth of data. But wait a minute. Surely I'm seeing things rather clearly. You know, how does 2 pixels really equate? So instead of seeing that Alsatian that was drawn in Francis Crick's picture, you shouldn't be seeing it like that. Really, at best, you should be seeing something like that. That should be your image of the world. But it's not. So we experience something more than the brain has got in data. There is some image-enhancing mechanism at work, taking the data that the brain has got and producing it with the detail, the richness, the incredible kind of accuracy that we experience the world in. So another one is time lag. Different senses, the input from different senses can process at different speeds within the brain. I want you to watch this carefully. You're pretty well seeing me clap and you're hearing the sound at the same time, aren't you? Now obviously, if we were a long distance away, there would be a distinct difference, wouldn't it? You know, you'd see the clap and then later on you hear it, you know? But at this distance, the speed of light and speed of sound in air makes very little difference. You should get it at the same time, and you do get it at the same time. It's synchronized. So let's just assume that the light hits our eye and hits our ear pretty well at the same moment. Fraction of a second later. Goes into the brain. Now the brain processes visual data and auditory data at a different rate. Which do you think it processes quicker? Huh? We kind of think, we always think that visual works quicker, but actually think of it in terms of a computer file. If you had a video file and an audio file, which would your computer deal with quicker and easier?
Audio.
The audio. See, it's a smaller package, isn't it? So similarly, the brain does the same. I don't know if that's the exact reason, but it seems to work as an analogy. The brain processes auditory data much quicker than visual data. Do you know what the time difference is? There's a delay, and that delay is, oh, where's it gone? Hey, half a second. Now, half a second may not sound like an awful long time, but it is a long time if you're experiencing things out of sync. You should basically be hearing clap, clap. That's about half a second. So that's weird. How is it that we experience it simultaneously? There's only two possibilities. Imagine you've got the sound department and you've got the video department in your brain. So the sound department gets through, bang, clap. You know, we've heard something. We've got to clap. Yeah, but what do we put it with? Well, we better call the visual guys and see what they've got. So they call up the visual department and say, look, we've got a clap through here. We think there might be some visuals to go with this. Is there anything that you've got? And they say, yep, we've got something. It's in the works at the moment. Just taking a little while just to kind of crank through it, but it's loading at the moment, and we'll be able to give you an answer in about half a second. Half a second? I've got to put out something now. What am I supposed to do with this sound stuff? Well, I suppose, why don't you just hold on to it and wait till we finish our processing, and then we can put the two together. Wouldn't that make sense? No! That means this person who is relying on his eyes and ears will have to wait half a second to find out what's going on in the world. That means he's experiencing with a half-second delay. Is that a good idea? How you can play a sport. Do you know how long it takes someone to serve from when the ball leaves the server's racket till it passes you on the baseline? Half a second. Fast bowling in cricket. Leaves the bowler's hand, smashes the stumps, half a second. You're standing there, smash. What? How did that happen? He hasn't even let go of the ball yet. Penalty is only a third of a second, that's why you've got no chance. But, so half a second is a long time, or then the video guys can say, well, I tell you what, we are taking a little time on this, but you heard something that sounded like a clap, didn't you? Yeah, it sounded like a clap. Well, why not just put it out with some picture of a clap? You know, I'm sure you can find that somewhere in the memory, you know, what it's like to have a clap. Just let the guy experience a memory of a clap with your sound. But that's not real, that's not going to tell him what's exactly happening out there, or who's clapped and why they clapped. Yeah, I know, but it's good enough, isn't it? So, that's actually the story that goes. Either we experience the world with a time delay, watching on catch-up, or the brain feeds us information before it has happened. That's the choice for the neuroscientists. And guess what? They don't like either. Something is happening. There is some mechanism that is turning data into qualia, that is enhancing that data, that sparse data, and giving us richness in qualia, and is also able to give it to us in real time. That requires a mechanism beyond the brain. That's the interesting thing. So, the neuroscientists tell us this. Either the brain makes its best guess at what is going on based on the input of the senses.
Excuse me. Can I just say something about thunder and lightning? Obviously you see the lightning first of all because light
That's
travels faster than
that's
sound.
the distance, yeah.
So, I mean, you're saying that was the other way around. But
No. What I'm saying is when you discount the movement in air, because there is a difference there. But when it's something right close to you, you should be able to have it synchronized, shouldn't you? If the brain was in sync. And it's not.
Sorry, that then begs the question of how does your brain actually then adjust for the distance? Because what you're saying, if you're...
No, the brain doesn't adjust for the
If
distance.
you're saying...
No, but it doesn't adjust for the distance because when you see the flash, you later hear the sound. So the brain isn't doing any adjustment. But when it's here, there's no need for adjustment in terms of the distance we are away from it. It's all to do with the processing time within the brain. And that's where the delay is. And that's why the neuroscientists say you should be able to tell the sound because we've seen the flash in your brain. But we haven't seen the visual flash yet. And they're not at the same time. There's half a second difference between them. So how can you experience the picture at the same time as the sound? That means you are experiencing the picture before you see the sound. Now, actually, Stuart Hameroff told us a really interesting story about this one, about one of his conferences. There was a guy over from Kevin O'Regan's institute in Paris, and he was showing some of the work that they were doing with EEG subjects. They attached them up to these electroencephalograms and were looking at the brain firing. And they would show them pictures. And they would say, here's a picture, and then you would see the flash, the image that was there in the person's brain. And it was being shown, it was as a video, so you were seeing it in live time. And as Stuart Hameroff was watching it, he said, surely we're seeing the reaction before the pictures come out. In that case, the brain seemed to be reacting even before the pictures happened. And it was weird. And the guy said, yeah, we noticed that. That's just something we don't like to talk about. Anyway, Anil Sheth, who's the kind of from the University of Sussex, and he's kind of Britain's main neuroscientist guy, I would say. He takes it a step further. He says, our perception is an hallucination partially moderated by sensory input. So he's saying it's not even that just you're guessing. He's saying you're living in an hallucination. And occasionally, a bit of sensory input gets in there, and that kind of adjusts the hallucination that you're having. So you're not really experiencing very much of the world if you rely entirely with what the brain has got and what the brain can do on its own. Now, I'm not trying to say anything disparaging about the brain. It is an incredible organ. It is phenomenally complex. But still, it has limitations which seems to require the addition of some extra mechanism to help it produce the experience that you enjoy. So, and the reason they have all those claims is because what we know about the brain and what it is capable of, there's no way to explain perception, there's no way to explain qualia, there's no way to explain that you feel you exist. So the common process these days, and there's been lots of kind of ways neuroscience have dealt with consciousness, they used to kind of try and reduce it and say, well, really we're just dealing with memories here, really we're just dealing with behavior, really we're just doing responses. No. Since David Chalmers and others, they know that they have to deal with something more than that. They have to deal with our sense of existence, our experience of qualia. Then they said, well, I think consciousness is just an epiphenomenon, an emergent property of the brain, when it's very complex. We don't understand how it appears, when it appears, why it appears, but somehow or other it must just appear. But they decided they didn't like that because that sounded too much like magic. It sounded dualistic, which, the kind of most of them are allergic to. The idea that basically you're really saying consciousness is something completely different to physical stuff. So they didn't like that. So now the main refrain is that actually consciousness doesn't really exist. It's just an illusion. You just think that you're experiencing stuff. You just think that you exist.
How can you, if the sensory inputs and outputs are dependent on your perception, how can you accurately measure the speed of sound if everything you perceive is just your own perception?
Yes. There's certainly, we have to be very careful of what we do, and we showed lots of ways in which we can be easily fooled in our perception. But still, it is the only means that we have. And therefore, the scientific method is to get lots of different people to do it in different ways and to agree on processes which try to remove the subjectiveness out of the equation, so that what you get that seems to be about right. And even then we keep changing it, adjusting it, you know. But that's all right. It gets tighter and tighter, you know. It gets more and more accurate as we go along. So there is ways to overcome the limitations and the errors that are naturally there. But really we're talking about something bigger here. We're talking about the actual ability of you to exist and to experience stuff. And unfortunately, just using the brain on its own and trying to say that the brain is responsible for everything will not give us an explanation of that. Rather, it tends to go, well, we know the brain isn't capable of producing consciousness, therefore consciousness can't exist. But we know it exists. Surely that should be the starting point. Now this is interesting because it's, if you like, the kind of Western scientific method, which I'm a great fan of, and you can tell, you know, I'm really into it, science in many different kind of formats and things. It's a brilliant system for amassing our knowledge of the world. But it is coming at the picture by saying, let's understand the physical stuff, the hard stuff, the biological stuff, the organs in our head. Let's try and understand everything from that perspective. But when we start to analyze the brain and everything it can do, we then realize we've just got rid of the very thing that made us ask the questions in the first place. Consciousness. So there is a different way of turning it around. And the Eastern systems of meditation and contemplation and philosophy, their viewpoint, and this was true in the West to some degree, you know, in classical times, but their view was, surely we should start from that which is known, and from the known we should explore the unknown. That's one way of looking at Occam's razor, you know, not just the simplest idea is the best, but actually you should explain the unknown from the known. And what is it that we know for certain? This was Descartes' thing, wasn't it? You know, what can I know for certain? He said, all the stuff that I have in my brain, you know, I may measure things wrong, I may think about things wrong, I may make mistakes about how big or how far away that is, or all sorts of stuff. Or whether it's white and gold or blue or black. I may get confused and make mistakes. But I know that I am the person having those experiences. My thoughts may be silly, may be wrong, but I am the person, I know I am the person having those thoughts. That I can be sure of. So the one thing that we started with, that we know for absolutely certain, I exist. I am the subject of my experiences. I experience the world. But what we had to be clear on is that, do I experience the world directly? No, I experience it as qualia within my mind. Now that doesn't mean that the world doesn't exist. That is a different philosophy called idealism. That if you only experience everything in your mind, how do you know the world exists? That's a kind of mind bender. But no. Perfectly accept the world is there. And we're experiencing it. And because it's there, and we're each experiencing, there is a lot of commonality in our experiences. We may not be able to tell each other exactly what the experience of redness is, but we're able to share a lot about it, and a lot about things we like eating, things we like hearing, things we like doing. We're able to share an awful lot of it. So the world is real, and our experiences of it are real. But they are qualia experiences. That's what's real. Qualia are real. Qualia are ineffable, and qualia are completely irreducible to the properties of physics and the properties of the brain. Therefore, qualia are considered non-physical. And because they're non-physical, then you have to ask, what is that is experiencing them? If qualia are non-physical, is that which experiences qualia, and only qualia, must be non-physical also. At least it's not the brain. So now we've come down to the idea that I want you to look at these two pictures here. Both taken from Hollywood blockbusters. One is Terminator 2. Remember watching that way back in 91 and saying, yes, interesting. And then this is Iron Man. And one of them contains a philosophical error. Which one? You're aware of Iron Man, you're aware of, you know? about Maurice and Terminator, that's inside Arnie the Terminator's robotic brain. Alright? Now, which has got the philosophical error? Bearing in mind everything I've just told you. You say the Terminator, voting for the Terminator. Anyone else agree to vote for the Terminator as the philosophical error?
What do you say what's wrong with it? I mean, what terms do you...
In philosophical terms. If there's spelling and there's other there's other problems with it as well. Okay, tell us why we should vote for the Terminator.
That's from the point of view of the Terminator.
Yeah.
He's not a human. You shouldn't see the world like a human.
Yeah. So this is the screen apparently inside the Terminator's computer. Does a computer need a screen in order to be able to process data that it's got inside itself? No. A computer would never ever do that. It would never take its data and turn it into language and pictures that it then has to decode and use for something else. Right? That is a philosophical error. You would should never show a computer doing that. Whereas Iron Man, what's the difference? It's showing you the same sort of pictures and data. Is that also an error? No, because that's a human being inside the machine, and he needs to see the screen. Without the computer of that suit showing him what's going on, he hasn't a clue what it's about. And you all know this. Why does a computer have a screen? Is it for itself?
No, it's for you.
It's for us, isn't it? It's so that it can tell us what's going on inside it. It's for us to understand what's happening in its data, what it's processing. You know, it's for the operator. So, as a simple way of getting our heads around what is happening inside us, let's just consider these four functions. You know, you have sensors, like we talked about video cameras, it could be a microphone, or whatever, picking up data from the world around, feeding it into the processor, the CPU, right? And churn, right? If it wanted, that can quite happily send messages back to some motor system and off it goes. You know, we're now, one of the big things now is autonomous vehicles. Earlier in the year I was at a conference at St George's House in Windsor Castle, organised by the government, looking at AI and, you know, issues of ethics. So we were kind of lectured to by some of the big guns in AI and all the things that are going on. And the question is, how is society going to cope with all of this stuff? You know, will AI become more intelligent than all of us and be, you know, yes. If it's not already, it's in narrow bands it is. Later on it'll be general, they'll be much more intelligent than us. And it might decide to keep us as pets. But one of the, we were looking at all the issues of autonomous vehicles, and we won't go into them now. But you can certainly program machines, like cars, to receive all sorts of data from the environment around it, and able to deal that autonomically. Just automatically get the data and feed it back. It doesn't need a screen, doesn't need to tell the passenger anything it's doing. It could happily do it all on its own. Right? Computers are happy without a screen. So, however, they do come with a screen. And that screen is we call the interface. We say that's the interface between the machine and the human. So what we're suggesting is that is sounds like a very simple parallel with what's going on inside us. We have our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and so on. And that feeds information, data into the processor of our brain. And that is read. That data is read and prepared for output on the screen of consciousness, on this interface of the mind, and that's just a little symbol of the conscious self. You know, if we want anything better. Alright? That's a little happy person. you know, radiating consciousness. So the conscious self. So that seems to be the model of what's going on. And we've only a short time tonight, and this is not only just meant as an introduction, to show you where the questions of consciousness are and where it might take us. But our point is that the entity that is having the experience of what is the output on the interface of the mind, the entity that is enjoying what's coming into the mind and observing it, is you. But you're not the brain, you're not the body, you know? Think about the body. The body is changing. But you have been the observer throughout all of those changes. From childhood to youth, to your age now, some of us to a little older, right? I mean, you can think back to your earliest childhood memory. Say anything preschool, happy one. Think of a nice happy incident, you know, way back. Or maybe your first day at school, something like that. How big were you, right? Tiny, right? You were there, weren't you? It was you experiencing the stuff. Now you've grown up a bit since then. Your personality has probably changed. Are you the same self? Well, if you think of self as just being personality, no, your personality's changed. But you are the self that has the personality. It was you having that personality as a little child then, and you are the you having your personality now. Your attitudes have changed, your desires have changed, your outlook has changed, everything has changed in your mental kind of world, but you are still the person having those mental experiences. When you were happy then, that was you being happy. If you fell down and hurt yourself, that was you feeling the pain then. It is you in your body experiencing that today. So, biologically we know that the body undergoes a lot of changes where the cells are being replaced. Even the chemistry of each cell is being replaced at a huge rate. Different parts of it, different organs get replaced at different rates. They say, kind of, you know, they tend to say, well, it averages out about 7 years. But it goes from a few weeks to quite a few years. Like your heart can last you a heart cell can last 25 to 30 years before it is replaced. So that's what you look after your heart. But even within those cells, the chemistry is changing. And they reckon that happens pretty well every year. So if you think about your body and where you were going to your first day at school, not one atom or molecule of that body is in the room today. You were there then, and you're here now, but not one atom of that body is present in the room today. You're not the body. And you're not the mind. The mind is fluid and full of all sorts of stuff, but you remain the observer of it all. And that's the process of yoga. I mentioned that the Eastern tradition tries to look at it from a different way. They say, actually, me existing and me being aware, that's got to be the starting point for knowledge. How can I develop a knowledge of the world out there unless I understand that which is doing the observing, that which is doing the analyzing, that which is doing the interpretation of that analysis? I have to understand that which is doing the work. I have to understand the thing that is I know to be real. Me, consciousness, the self. That's got to be the starting point. And Western philosophy has also kind of tended to be a little theoretical. You know? Whereas the Eastern systems, you know, and I'm not trying to pit one against the other, I'm just saying this was a different approach. Eastern systems decided that if we're going to look at consciousness, we'd better get serious about it. You know? And let's really go deep. Let's really make the study of the self and consciousness and my existence, my conscious existence, the subject matter of my quest for knowledge. So the various sages would undergo these incredible kind of feats of yoga and meditation. And the whole process of yoga, as described by Patanjali, is yogash, chittavritti, nirodha. The stilling of the fluctuations that are going on in the mind, trying to still that, reduce all that to nothing so that we actually can see that which is doing the observing. Because all of our day is spent absorbed in the thoughts that we are having. How much time do we spend on the thinker of the thoughts? Not a lot. Only when it either, we know when we're happy, fine, but we think it's the thoughts, we think it's the things we are doing that is making us happy. But we're not understanding who we are that's feeling the happiness. And when we're feeling pain and miserable and things are real trouble, we're just becoming more absorbed in the thoughts and the worries and the problems and the fears that we have. And we're letting that define who we are. So the yoga process was to try and calm those down. Not that we don't experience anything, but that we learn how to experience things kind of happily and not allow ourselves to be just on a kind of roller coaster of emotions which are controlled by circumstances outside of us and also by how we react to those circumstances, which is a mental thing which is also outside of us. How you mentally respond to stuff is actually within your control. That's the secret of yoga. You see, if you think that I'm just this brain and I am the mind and that my mind is me, you're under its control. You'll just do whatever it says. If it makes you feel happy, if it's doing something which is giving you good thoughts and feels happy, well, that's great. But the next minute it gives you something else. You're under its control. Rather, if I step back and understand I'm not the brain, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I am the Atma, the observer, the conscious self, seeing what my mind is doing. Then I can start to utilize my mind and decide, what do I want to achieve with it? Where do I want to focus my mind? How can that bring me greater happiness and satisfaction and clarity and meaning and purpose and connection in my life? Ultimately, the process of yoga is actually to help you stop judging everything and rejecting that which doesn't seem favorable, but to open you up in order to connect wholeheartedly and authentically with not just everything, but all people. To actually experience what it is like to have the love that is emanating from the Atma without it being complicated by all the worries, the fears, the baggage and stuff of the mind, which actually is hindering and debilitating your ability to love and to enjoy love. So that's the process of yoga. These guys here in the Atma Calf, they follow a type of yoga called Bhakti Yoga, which is an interesting one, because it, rather than try just to control the mind, it actually asks us to look at who we believe we are. I am not this body. I am the Atma. And to think, what does it mean?
The centre will be closing in 15 minutes' time.
All right, I got the message. So Bhakti Yoga is helping us understand, I'm not this body, I am the Atma. And therefore, how can I live authentically the life of a conscious being? In control of my mind, in control of how I behave and act towards others. How can I live in a way that is actually kind both to myself, but also to others and to all creatures? Because if the Atma is present in me, it's also present in you. Why should I put my needs so much above yours? Why should I put my species above other species? Is there a way of living with a lot more consciousness? And at that I'll stop. Maybe we've got time for some questions if anyone wants to raise anything. Sorry.
So is the conscious, the Atma, is it essentially immaterial and non-physical?
Yeah, now that's the first question that a lot of people want to know. What's consciousness made of? Yeah? Now, if I get asked that a lot, and it seems a very natural question. But if I asked you, what is matter made of? What's matter made of? Do you know? Huh?
Molecules,
What are molecules made of?
atoms,
And what are atoms made of?
Subatomic particles.
They're made of subatomic part. Subatomic part, what are they? Ultimately, when you get down to what matter is, we find out that matter is simply energy with information. That's all it is. And we define matter in terms of its properties, what it is like and what it does. No one knows what matter is. We have no idea what physical matter actually is made of. Because when we look at it deeper and deeper and deeper, we end up with this energy and its properties. And in fact, the smallest things like electrons or quarks or gluons or things like that, we define. I was reading one interesting article of this the other day. The physicist explained that you have to understand that an electron, which you think is a real thing, is that thing which has the properties which we say it must have in order to do the things that we see it doing. So ultimately we get down to a level of reality where we're simply defining ourselves what properties it must have in order to do the things that we say it does. You didn't know that, did you, about physical matter? So we don't even know what physical matter is. Therefore, but we know it in terms of its properties and its functions. And I want you to understand consciousness in the same way. Understand it according to its properties and its functions. And it's been such a kind of digression to start defining matter and spirit and mind, matter and all that sort of stuff. This is Western dichotomy. It is not the approach of Eastern philosophy. Basically, Eastern philosophy says it's all one energy, but it is energy manifesting it with different functions. Right? And physical matter is the functions of observable properties and characteristics, its hardness, its sound, its visual things. Whereas consciousness is the function of observing those characteristics and experiencing them as qualia. So consciousness is that which does the observing. Physical matter seems to exhibit observable properties for consciousness. And now with quantum physics we're starting to realize actually physical matter starts to present its properties according to the questions we ask about how we want to see it. This is the whole wave particle duality and the double slit experiment and all that sort of stuff, which is another story for another day. So does that answer the question of what is consciousness, what's it made of? It'll do for now, yeah? And if you want to know more about what it is, you're going to have to delve into it yourself. Delve into your own consciousness. Become a scientist of the subjective, of your own consciousness.
Hi. Consciousness, we have consciousness. As you go up the animal kingdom, there seems to be a greater consciousness. Do you believe that lesser animals have consciousness? And if you do, at what point do we stop having consciousness? Does that animal kingdom stop having consciousness?
I was discussing this point with...
the wasp in the car, for example, on the way here.
No,
I apologise for it.
that's a really nice question. Thank you for that. I'm going to mention one thing that's very important in understanding consciousness. When we say we are the Atma is consciousness. And it's experienced as us experiencing consciousness. So we are consciousness, and rather than something we have. The Atma is consciousness. That's its function. That's why we're experiencing ourselves as conscious beings. All right. So how far does it extend? Last year I was with Roger Penrose at Oxford, and we were discussing this very point, because he believes that consciousness exists down the scale, but he kind of still thinks it's something to do with kind of neural ability. Whereas the model that we've just given doesn't depend on neural ability. Rather, it's the model of the operator, the interface of the mind, and whatever sensory apparatus exists is enough for there to be an awareness. So that could extend all the way down. And I remember when we mentioned to Rog But plants as well. Never mind the wasps or the insects. You could go right down to plants. And he said, wonder what the vegetarians will think of that. But there's a lot of experiments these days. And one of the ways to look at consciousness in animals, are you okay if I take just a couple of minutes on this? It's a nice point. Some people say, well, animals can't have consciousness because they don't think. And they can't think in language. Right? Have you heard that argument? Because we think in language, animals obviously don't have language to that way, and therefore they cannot think. And therefore if they can't think, they can't have consciousness. Now that's trying to say consciousness is all to do with thinking, processing. I asked one zoologist who was an animal behavior specialist at one conference, and I asked her this question about animals and consciousness. What's the issue over language? She said, well, that's been the standard kind of issue for a long time. Now there's new thought coming into the process, because sometimes when a human person has a stroke, they have their language area, which is Wernicke's area in the brain, knocked out. And some of these folk then describe how they can't understand language in any way. Written, spoken, nothing. And they say they do not even think in language anymore. But they believe that they have been thinking absolutely lucidly all the time. So although we are very accustomed to thinking using language, it doesn't seem it is even necessary or for humans. It's just what we seem to do a lot of the time. But a lot of thinking is not language based. So her understanding is that's now being fed into the animal world. Animals don't need to think in language to be conscious. Now the next one is, yes, but they don't have the ability to introspect. We can do this thing where we can look at our thoughts and think, I am the thinker of my thoughts. Therefore I am different from my thoughts. Therefore maybe I am the Atma. We can do that. Can an animal do that? No. Probably not. Does that mean an animal isn't conscious just because it can't introspect the fact that it might be different from its mind? No. Doesn't change it. So bearing in mind what we talked about for the whole first half of this discussion, what do you think would be the criterion for determining whether animals have consciousness or not? What do you think that criteria might be? It rhymes with that. What was that funny word we talked about? Qualia. That becomes the question. Do animals experience qualia? Now, it's very clear that animals have sensory organs in the same way as we do. They have things which can convert light, convert air pressure, for auditory things, tactile, and so on. They seem to do they have all the abilities and all the organs that we have. Yeah, I'm going to answer this question, but we're okay because we can get that. We're down that side, so we're not worried about the centre. We only open these gates at midnight when I finish. So we know that the animals have got the sensory apparatus, but the question then is, do they have the ability to sense data from the world and process it and maybe respond to it, but do they subjectively feel it? That becomes the question. Now that's a hard one. Philosophically we could say, well, they seem to have the same apparatus as us. We experience that as qualia. Why wouldn't you assume that animals are also enjoying qualia of their own? Because they seem to like things of colour. I was talking to one falconer who works where I live in Wales. Oh, sorry, here in Wales. I'm used to giving lectures everywhere else. I'm apologising. So up in the Brighton Beacons, he runs a falconry thing. He was saying that his mate has trained one of his falcons to recognise the colour orange and to get a treat every time So this bird is often going picking up anything it can find that's orange, you know, or anything nearby, you know, and bring it back to the owner. And where's my treat? Now, is that simply a data thing, or is he subjectively experienced? It's very hard to tell with sensory qualia. It is hard to tell. I would suggest that the parallels are such that if we experience qualia from those senses, we should ascribe them to the animals as well. But a better one that is now being used by the scientists is pain. Now, pain is a very important qualia. You might think that it's kind of, surely that's really kind of just stimulus and response, you know? You hit something, nerves fire, goes up here, you go, ooh, you react, there's a response. But painfulness is considered to be one of the inexplicable, they're all qualia are inexplicable, but painfulness is often quoted as an archetype. And the idea is that although we know all about analgesics, anesthetics and so on, still we don't understand how, and we know your skin has got 5 types of sensors, tactile sensors. So some of them pick up hard stuff, you know, or hard knocks, and they can sense, so if there's damage, it sends a message to the brain. We know where the brain goes, we know how to knock out the action of the brain. But why do we experience that as, ow, we feel that, we feel it, we experience it, there's a what it is likeness to experience pain. That's just another flash in the brain. This flash produces an image in our mind. This one produces a sound. This one produces, ouch. So it's just another form of qualia. So now they're doing a lot of experiments on animals to test whether they feel pain. And what they've had to do is devise a criterion that separates pain responses. You know, it stops it being just a response, but they're looking at, and I may not get this exactly right, but they're looking at when a creature develops strategies for avoiding future pain, which it then makes, it adjusts its behavior at a price to itself. That becomes the criterion. If a creature can be shown to do that, then you can say it is feeling pain. And they started with primates, and you know, okay, yes, and you know, they obviously seem to be very close to us, and they feel pain. Went through the various mammals, and you know, if anyone got pets, you know, when your pet's got an owie, you don't go, well, you know, I would sympathise, but I recognise that my experience of qualia and pain is very different to yours. You're just a kind of machine, and that's just an autonomic response, and you're just going, ow, 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 and holding your paw up, you know. And I just know that you're actually not really feeling anything inside. So that's the attitude we take, isn't it? No, of course not. We recognise there's something in there suffering, you know? And even it's been shown that animals recognise that suffering in each other and will do things which are altruistic in order to help one another. Now they've gone further and further down the list. Queen's University in Belfast did a famous study just released a couple of years ago on shellfish and lobsters. And they showed that even at that level, where the neural material isn't anything like our own, still, even those creatures fulfill this criterion of future strategies to avoid future pain, you know, which involve a kind of price to itself. So their conclusion was lobsters feel pain, you know. And they've now done a lot of work on plants. And the secret world of trees is now becoming a whole big thing. Well, of course, where's their neural material? Apparently within the roots. These are connecting. And trees will feed each other nutrients, but only within the same species. They're a really bigoted bunch, you know, trees. They will feed their own kind, but not others. Anyway, so all the way down, who knows? But at least the model that I've showed you of the Atma with its interface, picking up the data that is processed within that creature from its senses, but allowing that creature that Atma in that body to experience it as qualia, fits all the way down. So I would suggest that the simplest picture is that all life is the interplay of the Atma and its physical body. It's with its senses, picking up the world, but every Atma is enjoying what it can get from its sensory experiences. And I think it's really important to see that creatures are looking for happiness, love, and just a comfortable, happy time, in this world like we are. I don't believe we are that different. We may think ourselves very civilized and like to do things in a particular way, but in many ways we are very, very alike. I think, okay, I'll take one more.
Last question, yeah. So, if consciousness is energy, it can neither be created nor be destroyed. So how do we get consciousness into the physical body, and what happens afterwards it leaves the body, the physical body?
Okay, so if consciousness is energy, as you said, and therefore, never created and destroyed, yes, and yes. So how does it connect with the material body? Yeah, this is the interaction question, which is often, people think that this image, this kind of thing here, where you've got the brain and consciousness, is a kind of dualism. Now, in one sense, anyone's going to put this into the dualistic category because I've defined different functions. And I've said that consciousness cannot be reduced to the brain. That makes it a dualistic theory. However, all the arguments against dualism do not apply to the Atma paradigm. Because the interaction takes place through the mind, through that interface. And there's a lot of experiments that we could have talked about and we could have done together to show how consciousness and the mind can gather information separately from the brain. But that's a different story for another day. So, how does consciousness connect? Now, the interesting thing about consciousness is that it likes to get involved in stuff. Imagine you're at the cinema, watching the screen, right? You're all sitting there very comfortably. Movie's on, it's one of these scary horrors, there's a guy coming up the stairs. You're identifying with the hero. The hero or the heroine's upstairs, hiding out. But up the stairs comes this guy, and this up the stairs comes in, but he's got the axe. And he goes, and then you watching in the audience get startled. The biggest jeopardy to you is you're going to spill your drink or your popcorn. But you have allowed yourself to identify with what's going on the screen because it's fun. Because it gives you a new experience. Just sitting there on your own would be boring. So as soon as there's something going on which isn't anything to do with you at all, you are happy to identify with it, to absorb yourself in the emotions that are going on out here, and to make those emotions your own. And that's what consciousness does with this body. It's like VR. It's like playing one of these video games where you go on and you can create your own avatar, right? And you invest yourself in that avatar. That becomes you. And you're going out into the world, fighting quests and, doing this, that, and the other. Right? So, in that way, consciousness invests in... And there's when we say mind, is a kind of Western terminology. In the Eastern philosophy, particularly Indian philosophy of Sankhya, it divides the functions of mind into three: ahankar, buddhi, and mana. Again, that's probably a nice subject for a deeper study. And it's a very interesting psychological analysis. The first one is persona. It's where you believe yourself. Here I am. I am now willing to believe I am this physical body. Because when I think like that, it's like thinking I am the person on the screen. I am the avatar in my game. And they've done studies now of gamers where when they get killed in the game, they feel real grief. They actually suffer real grief and trauma. And it's something to be dealt with. It's because the belief, the identification is so powerful. And that's the situation for the Atma at the present time. Our identification that I am this body has become so deep that I think my body's growing old. I'm getting old. My body may die. I may die. That's the illusion. That's as silly as thinking, you know, the person's killed on the screen or my avatar's killed in the game. I'm dead. No. But it's a bit like the video game, you know, when you're killed. Game over. Do you want to play again? That's another story for another day, reincarnation. All right, I better stop now, but thank you very much.